Okay, this is a video basically looking at this asset with a view to getting it to 3D print. This is just born of a direct request, and I thought I'd show my observations, and what I decided to do in the end was basically create an imitation of this. It's not 100% accurate. Things here where they curve off to a sharp edge. I've basically gone with this sort of sharp edge on the faces all the way along my model. And in fact, if I just open up my model, you can see I did do one bit with the rounded edges showing what you could do, and if I go into edit mode, you can see how much more extra geometry is there and things I've done to sort of mitigate the smoothing errors. But I mean, even with this, if you wanted to add a bit of variance, you could just to extrude them, drag them out a bit, and then you can just move them a little bit to give them a sort of sense of variance if you wanted to. Yeah. Or you can just take all of these and just selecting these. I'll go over what I'm doing in terms of selecting and that in a bit later on. So GX, you just push that back in. That one's a bit much, and I'm just constraining it to the axis here, so you can see it give you a bit more variation. It looks a bit nicer than just a straight edge like that, but it's not as much detail as that. And again, if this is for 3D printing, that's an aesthetic stroke personal choice as to what you want to do. So that's the model I created. So let's go back to the original. Don't worry about that error. That's because I've basically hidden my config for Blender 3.2. So I'm starting with a vanilla flavor of Blender, shall we say, as opposed to how I normally have it set up. Because I don't know what add-ons people have. The only add-ons I have got active is Snapping Pies, which is a favourite of mine, and QBlocker for drawing out for drawing out primitives. Now, Snapping Pies is free. It's by Master Xeon 1001. The only caveat with this is it doesn't install like a normal add-on. When you download the zip, you get a zip file, and it has a directory Power Snapping Pies Master. But that is not installable. It simply has just the py file there, and to be installable it would need things like initpy and a couple of other things. So open the zip file when you download it, the links will be in the description, and put it somewhere and just install the py file. At QBlocker, you can give the author some money, and if you can afford it, I would always recommend you do, because it's a handy little add-on. You know, it allows you to create things on the fly and get much more control over them. So I'm a big fan of that particular add-on. But the only sort of two non-native add-ons I'm using. The other one you absolutely must have active is Bool Tool. I also have Loop Tools active because I can't sort of get by without not using that, and of course I Node Wrangler and various others, but they all tend to be down to a personal preference. Another thing is I have things assigned to shortcuts. Now if I go into edit mode and I select that. And how you assign a shortcut, if I did Control E there to pull up the edge menu, and for example I use Mark Seam a lot, so right mouse button, assign shortcut, and then I just press the shortcut, and again I set up the various shortcuts that I would tend to normally use. Yeah, things like that, and like on select, I would select loops and then select boundary loop, like that. And then once you've done that, make sure you go into your preferences, and if you don't have it set up for auto save, make sure you save it. You can tell something's been changed by the asterisk. If you don't save it, the next time you open Blender, your shortcut keys will be forgotten. So set them up as you like. I have a few keys set up by default. I have merge to last set up, and that's set up to the number 0 above the letters on the keypad. I have linked flat faces, so I can select, if I choose faces, by the way that is 1, 2 and 3 on the numbers above the keys. You get your cursor in the viewport, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, like that, and I can go select linked flat faces, which I have to Shift Control Alt F, which is basically sort of how it used to be set up legacy in older versions of Blender. So it's just a keystroke. Although it's complex, I've become familiar with it. Simple as that. So right, the sort of the key things for actually just setting it up. Now I would say, if you have the money, there are a couple of add-ons which I think are worth every penny and make your modelling life a lot easier, certainly doing hard surface and anything non-organic. I am not in any way, shape or form affiliated with the people who make the add-on, but I'll tell you what, let me just... I'm just going to get rid of these things. Right, but they are add-ons I can't live without. Mirror Tools is another one. This is free. If anyone comes from Lightwave, they add a sort of similar feature to some of the user-defined fall-offs. C-Stretch is probably the one that I use the most, but that's a topic for another video, which I think I may actually have one on my channel about that. But the ones I use most are Hard Ops, Box Cutter and Mesh Machine. And I think I can honestly say rare is the day that I fire up Blender and don't access some portion of those add-ons. They just make life a lot easier doing things. You'll see later on, I'll be showing you when I'm modeling, I'll use Symmetrize, and well, I'll show you here actually. Symmetrize, Mesh, Symmetrize. And I've got X plus to X minus, then I've got to reselect everything, Mesh, Symmetrize, and Y plus to Y minus to get that. Oh, hit the 0 key there. So if I undo that, with Mesh Machine active, I could do Alt X, drag, Alt X, drag. Couldn't get any easier. Mesh Machine also has some wonderful bevel related actions. So like if we just select this, bevel it like that, and then I decide I don't like that, select that edge, control click that edge, go Y for Mesh Machine and choose that, and I can pull that in, then roll my mouse like that, that tidies that up. And then I suddenly decide actually that is just still too blocky. I can go Y, refuse, and I increase the amount of edges. And then I decide I don't like that. I actually want to get rid of that bevel. Y, unbevel. Then I can get rid of that. Y, unbevel. So they are worth their weight in gold if you can afford them. I mean, they're not cheap. They're not the most expensive add-ons available, but they're not cheap. But if you've got the money, I heartily recommend them. I say I'm no way affiliated with these people, but they have made my life so much easier when I'm modelling. So back to the task at hand, which is said house. Okie dokie. Right now, as it stands, this house has 134,000 vertices, and on the face of it, it looks fine. But if I choose face mode, select one, press L to select anything that's linked via geometry, and hide it, well, you can see it's got this massive, messy inner geometry. So first thing to do is actually separate that. And I did there was I just did A to select everything that was visible, P to separate by selection, and now I've got another object. Hide that in the outlier, Alt H to unhide what I've actually got. And we're down to 5,600 vertices from 134. So that alone is going to save you some serious sort of filament if you're 3D printing. Now, even as it stands, this is not ideal for 3D printing. And if I just go inside the building, as it were. Now you can only do this in perspective mode. If you've got a numpad, I'm going to assume people have got numpads here. 5 will toggle between perspective and orthographic. Orthographic is great for modelling in. And I sort of basically only use perspective for checking inside things like buildings. Most of my modelling is done orthographically speaking. And you know, you can see this has got stuff going on, but it's messy, frankly. If I select that to select linked and hide that, you can see that that's got some geometry there. So I'll select that, select linked and hide that, and you see you've got even more geometry here. Well, that's a redundant geometry. It's even in sort of, if it wasn't being 3D printed, that's redundant because you'd never see it, it'd never be used, and it only goes halfway up what would be the door. So it's just, as I say, in terms of usable geometry, it's a bit of a mess. And so what you'd be inclined to do is try and tidy this up a bit. I'm using Shift Alt Z there to toggle the overlays. If you look up here, you can see the overlay toggling. Now you see I pressed the Shift Alt Z there and nothing's happening. I need to be in the viewport. Be conscious of your keystrokes are based on where your mouse is. So if you get something weird happen, first things first, check where your mouse is, because you may have actually called a function you didn't mean to. So, right, anyway. So that is all face, so I would select linked, then I would press delete, and I would choose limited dissolve. And that would just tidy that up. And I just repeat that process pretty much anywhere I can. Like this. You're just going along, you're doing limited dissolve, and this is part of my cleanup procedure. I do have a couple of videos on cleaning up meshes. They're older ones, but they're still relevant. Now, in situations like this where it's just two triangles, you can either select both triangles, press F to make it one face, or you can go into edge mode, select it, and do Control X to dissolve that edge. You know, but where there's more than one, then I'll select linked, and I'll do a limited dissolve, and it gives me a better result. and I basically go through and I'm just tidying up how much of this you would actually really need to do for 3D printing. I don't. It's hard to say. You could probably get away with a lot. Again, if the mesh is just for 3D printing. But if it's going to be used elsewhere, then you want it as clean as you can get, really. Now in here, I can see these are all triangles. So what I'm going to do is select them, then Control plus. So it's holding Control, pressing the plus on the numpad. And I'm going to go out there, then I'm Alt J to turn tris to quads. And that's done all of that tidy up for me. Again, select everything, limited dissolve. It's not exciting stuff, this. I call it donkey work, because it's repetitive stuff, but you know, the job needs to get done, basically, and you basically carry on like that, so tidying up where you can. I'm not going to do the whole thing because, well, you get the idea. Sometimes limited dissolve won't work on the whole face, so if I select that, you can say select link back faces, it defaults to 1 degree initially, not picked everything up. And even if I turn that up, you know, you keep turning it up until you get what you want. So if I sort of make that 5 for now, and now try limited dissolve, you can see it's still not done it. There's an issue there. So I just undo that, and I'd sort of basically choose to disregard that and rebuild that face. Now we're talking about bad geometry. Here's a case in point. Let's select those 3, and you can select multiples with click and shift click, as you can see. Then I'll flat face them, select these, and limited dissolve. Right. Now the reason I did that in sections, if I chose both of them and did limited dissolve, depending on the angle that limited dissolve had, it might choose to flatten that. I normally have that at 1 degree or less, just to make sure that I'm not accidentally selecting something I shouldn't. And I'll just quickly show you something here. If I pull up a cylinder, and let's give it something quite significant, like 128 faces. Move that along the x-axis. And I go into here, and I select those, and I do limited dissolve, and I make that 5. You can see it's broken that geometry, and that's where I wouldn't use it. So let's say we had multiple rings here, and we just wanted to make those all one ring. So I'm going to select them, shift select, Control I, and I'm going to do limited dissolve, and I'm going to change that to 0.1, and that way it preserves the boundaries, but it gets rid of those. So do make use of that when you're working on limited dissolve, but don't go overboard with the angle, otherwise you can end up losing geometry. So anyway, as I say, back to this little beast. These here are a mess, and I'll show you why. If I select these, I'm going to hide them. I'm just going to limited dissolve these just for clarity, because the amount of polygons they've got going on at the moment just makes it hard to sort of show what I'm on about. So I'm going to select them, right, and I'm going to Alt H and then Shift H, so that unhead things I had hidden, and then hid things I didn't have selected. And here you can see the issue. You see, you look at this, and we've got really badly overlapping geometry here. It's just flat out a mess. You know, it's just not right. Now 3D printing, I can't imagine that would be happy at all, because it doesn't know what is front and back, and certainly, excuse me, shading wise, when you're sort of creating a model, that is just a no-no. It really is. You're letting yourself in for a world of hurt. So that's the process I go along about tidying up. I mean, in those situations, I would probably try and select geometry around it, shift hide, and then try and figure out a way of cleaning that up. And the way I would probably do that, I mean, looking at that, you've got overlapping geometry and intersecting geometry. I honestly am not sure there's a nice way of doing that, to be fair. You could probably spend a lot more time trying to fix this than you would just rebuilding it from scratch, which is what I ended up doing. But that said, that alone is in a better state than it was previously, and then how much further into that you go to fix things up it's entirely up to you. You know, you can spend far too long on trying to make this quote right unquote. Then you could doing otherwise. So I say you could keep going like this, and even with this done, it's still not right. Simply put, you know, there's still a lot of work to do, and I wouldn't want to try and figure this out in terms of making it usable for any other scene. So I just chose to rebuild it. I'd say it's not identical. These bits here are different, but if you look at these, you've got some rounded and then some are just basic. Well, they're basically six-sided cylinders down the side. It's only the end bits that they've fancied up. But I chose not to do that just for speed. So what I'm going to do from here on in is show you how I rebuilt this from scratch, utilizing parts of this model. But I'm actually going to stop this video here and just leave it as a standalone on some of the issues you face with sort of third-party meshes, and certainly things like STL files and things like that, where they are not sort of tidy geometry speaking, even though they may look it. And that was so right. The next video we're going to rebuild this thing, and it is going to end up looking something like that. That's the theory, and we'll be doing it using probably 5 or 6 commands throughout the whole thing. And in all honesty, those 5 or 6 commands probably account for 90% of my modelling. They're just the ones you use. One thing I will show you, I'll just show you how useful QBlocker is. So let's say this was the original one and you wanted to rebuild that doorway. I could do a Shift A. I've selected that object, Shift A, QBlocker, and add a plain cube. And you can see it's orientated to that, so I can just do that, drag that down, pull it out, click, right click, and this is where snapping pies comes in as well. I can go into edit mode, select that point there, Shift S, origin to selection, so I can then base all my movements off there. So I can just GZ to move it up, I can scale Z to get the size I want, I can scale Y to get the thickness I want, GY. Now that's called locking axis with Blender when you're doing moves, scales or rotations. I can do G and I can move it. I can GY, I can move it just on the Y no matter what my mouse does. I can do G Shift Y and I can move it anywhere but on the Y axis. Get used to using those because they make your life so much easier. and they work in things in edit mode. If I select a face, I can go GY to just make sure that goes there, like that. I can select an edge, GZ, only go up and down, like that. GZ, press Z again, and it's going where it thinks the normal is. GY, Y, X, X. It thinks X is up. So get used to those keys. I'd really recommend just playing with them. So just like, you know, add a cube, GY, GX, scale X, scale Z, scale Y. Now, one thing I will just touch on before I finish actually is scale is important in Blender, if you don't already know. If I now try to go into edit mode and bevel one of those edges, Control B, it's not behaving as you expect it, and if I select that face and Control B, that is not what you think would happen. And the reason for that is it's still trying to apply that action on a one-to-one. So if I do Control A and scale, and you'll see me doing a lot of that when I'm editing. Now on a Control B, you get the expectation, you get the sort of result you expect. Control B and get a much nicer result. So just be aware of that. Always check that in object mode, and it has to be done in object mode, applying the scale. And I also do that a lot. So say for example I choose this and I make that my selection. I now want this to be a set length. Now I want it to be 0.225 long, like that. You can see it's adjusted the scale. If I put 125 long, like that, that's on the Z. So I'm just going to undo that. I actually want it on the Z, the X-axis. So let's start that again. Original X-axis, make it 2 meters long. Now can apply the scale, and I'll do that a lot. So just something to be aware of. I may forget to mention it when I'm modeling because I just do it all the time automatically. So anyway, that now you could try pulling that out, but it does have issues still. I'll go into wireframe, point mode, back into solid mode. Yeah, you could. It's oh, sorry, that's mine. So mine doesn't have issues at all. What am I on about? Let's go back to the Ritten House. Duh. It's the danger of not watching what you're doing. So inverse. Select that, Control Shift F, not F at all, linked, Control I. I'm just going to delete those vertices. Right, 1B, hide, Shift Z. They say this has got issues. It's got just a skin for the wall, even though it's a badly formed skin. It's just a skin, there's no depth to it. Whereas the model I had, because it was built of cylinders, it did have an actual depth, which I presume will come out better for printing. Full disclosure, I do not have a 3D printer. My only knowledge of 3D printing is a few videos I've watched on the subject, and having a couple of friends who do have them. I don't know why I'm doing that, but we're going to cover that in a bit. But certainly, I mean, the fact that that's paper thin does suggest it just wouldn't lend itself well to printing 3D, which is why I think they had the internal structure, but it was overkill. So anyway, as I say, I'm going to stop here, and half an hour has been more than long enough. The next video will be building the model, and I advise a cup of coffee on that because it's going to be a fairly long process, but it's an easy process and it's a lot easier than you think. So signing off for now.